Hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. If I stand here, is this okay? Standing here? Well, thanks, Lori, and I'm really sorry my family situation precludes me from being there in person with everybody, but it's good to see everybody back together again discussing brook trout. I did want to provide an update on our work through the Chesapeake Bay program, Brook Trout Workgroup. As Lori mentioned, I co-chair with Katie Ombalski. We report to the management board every 2 years, and much of what I'm going to talk about today is what I presented to them about our efforts, because it really summarizes that. So like I was saying, essentially a lot of this information is designed to inform the management board, Chesapeake Bay Management Board, about what we're trying to accomplish. And as most of you know, the Brook Trout Workgroup is really a microcosm of the joint venture. The Bay State members from the joint venture are components of the Brook Trout Workgroup and work closely with me and Katie on putting all this together. And I really wanted to help the management board and the Chesapeake Bay program better understand the magnitude of the challenges facing the brook trout and conservation community. So as many of you probably know, our outcome is the Chesapeake Bay program brook trout outcome is to increase occupied brook trout habitat by 8% by 2025. And but I really wanted to emphasize to the Bay program, we're part of the Vital Habitats goal team, and their goal is to restore, enhance, and protect this network of land and water habitats. And that I really wanted to emphasize that they understand that restoring, sustaining brook trout requires much more than just brook trout biologists working in the stream. That success in reaching this outcome is intrinsically connected to the activities in the entire watershed. Next. So the big overview is we're not on track to achieve the outcome. You know this. We heard from Dan this morning about the trajectory in Maryland. And really at the basic high level, we simply need more resources and increased coordination across the groups to address the barriers, and also for us to better track the gains and losses. Next. So I described the overarching challenge as, the detrimental impacts are really just occurring across the watershed faster than the conservation community can identify and mitigate those impacts. Next. So the Chesapeake Bay program requires work groups to use their logic and action plan template, provide uniformity across the outcomes for the factors and gaps and actions associated with each of those. We accomplished about 22 of our 28 action items in the last 2 years, with some of the highlights being the getting the stack genetics workshop funded and held that several folks have mentioned already. Lots of new publications and tools on genetics and groundwater-driven thermal refugia. We got probably a little caught up in the keeping up with the Joneses with 28 action items, as we didn't want to look like slackers compared to some of the other work groups. But we've updated our plan for the next 2-year cycle to really emphasize more quality over quantity. Next. At least we hope it'll be quality over quantity. So we're more focused on large-scale priority action items to engage the members and stakeholders on things like, maintaining at least 75% riparian forest cover in all brook trout watersheds, the fencing of livestock out of streams, and particularly, where can we better engage with private landowners and incentives and programs around that, and promoting land stewardship as big picture items that if we can work on those, that'll alleviate hopefully some of the stressors on brook trout habitat. Next slide. We've also identified a number, or really 3 big priority science needs to expand our understanding of groundwater impacts and thermal refugia in headwater systems, determine how the interactions between climate change and land use will affect brook trout. And as Steve mentioned, this idea of genetic metrics necessary to determine brook trout population health and resiliency. We already know a lot about some of these topics, but there's an awful lot we don't know. And, there's both an applied research aspect as well as the use and application and management decisions that are part of this. But this is really focused here on the science component. How do we answer some of these basic questions around these topics? Next. We're asked to provide what our trajectory and our progress is towards the outcome, and our answer is we really don't know. Steve Perry drafted the initial 2016 baseline and expected trajectory using the joint venture assessment. That originally, at that point, was about 108 square kilometers per year. The fact that we really probably didn't have any gains for a couple of years, we're now, if we still want to make that outcome, we really need to get 137 square miles per year in terms of just net increase. And the current assessment process is not sufficient for several reasons, some of which we've discussed and will continue to discuss, different approaches, different baselines. Was kind of my question to Dan about, where they were calculating their losses from, different timelines for the updates. So we're trying to figure out a way to improve on that, to get a better idea to quantify this trajectory and progress. Next. So some of our challenges is the Brook Trout Workgroup in and of itself is just, a cast of volunteer army. So there's really no capacity for us to develop metrics to quantify the conservation actions or develop the framework to collect and quantify all the restoration activities on our own. We heard Nat in his introduction this morning talk about hundreds and hundreds of brook trout projects over the years by all the partners and stakeholders. And we really want to be able to measure and track the impact of the totality of these projects, because I think while there is a lot of loss and problems associated with this process, there's a lot we're not capturing either. So we'd really like to be able to do that. Next. So we successfully pursued funding through the Bay Program GET. That's the Goal Implementation Team program. They have funds available, and so we put forward this proposal to hire a contractor really to lead the effort to help identify opportunities for cross-GET collaboration. So there's a number of other goal teams like Fish Passage and Land Stewardship that have common goals and action items that impact brook trout habitat. So we want to be stronger, better connected with those. We want to strengthen our coordination with other stakeholders that aren't typically part of the Brook Trout Workgroup, particularly NGOs that we don't operate or engage with. We know Trout Unlimited and have been working with them, but there's a lot of watershed groups, riverkeeper groups, all kinds of folks that are out there doing things. And then we're hoping to collect and compile this existing data to better analyze and the monitoring and implementation data to track that progress. Next slide. So the other part of this new project and the contractor will do is also work. We've gotten commitment from the Chesapeake Bay Program EPA Data Center team. They're the group that is funded by EPA through the Bay, with the Bay Program, to quantify and keep track of all the work that the Bay Program does. And they've agreed to provide a team to help us develop a tracking and reporting application, and as well as develop QA procedures and potentially an online database. And then we certainly want to build these stronger collaborations on these connected actions like reforestation, connectivity, and land conservation. The proposals were due this past Monday. So we hope to have this project up and running in another month or so. And we certainly want to work closely. The questions Jason raised and we've talked about already here today are things that we can work on to help make this synergistic, coordinate this framework and this database, not create a whole nother layer of effort for anybody. But we have this new project with this person dedicated to doing this. So we're hopeful that that's going to really move the needle on this component of being able to quantify. And it's not just restoration. A lot of focus the Bay program is all on restoration, but we talked about this a little bit in the Brook Trout Workgroup. There's a whole suite of conservation activities that all of you and your partnerships are engaged in that really aren't quantified either. And without those, we'd be even further behind on the outcomes. So we're trying to get the Bay program to create the data, or we'll collect the data and present it in a way that they understand the totality of the effort is not only just in restoration, but in protecting these strongholds and these high quality habitats from loss in order to even come close to attaining that outcome. So that's my last slide, and I think again, I'm hopeful to help facilitate any of these conversations with Jason and the team on where we can provide some support in these efforts.
Great, thank you.
I'll certainly answer any questions, or however you want to, if you want break and come back to talk about whatever you want to do, Laura.
Yeah, I was going to take questions on your presentation. There I am. Sorry, I guess nobody can see. There, no, I see you. So does anybody have a question for Steve? And we'll break soon, but we can give another 5 minutes to this.
I had a question for you, Steve. Nat here. So tell me a little bit more about the Chesapeake Bay working team and all these other metrics. And if brook trout is a real outlier in that we haven't been able to increase our catch size over the time period, or if you think we're not able to just quantify and share that, just like some of the other groups might have a better reporting system.
Yeah, I don't think there's any better reporting system out there. That the original concept was to use the assessment, the joint venture assessment update. And as Steve Perry originally conceived it, I guess we all did in that first phase, was this would be a 5-year process. So 2016 was the baseline, and here in 2021, 22, we'd update that. But that 5-year interval is a pretty long time period for the Bay program with respect to understanding, these trends and activities. So there's that aspect of it. And then from my perspective, and I'm certainly open to other interpretations, the assessment only covers so much. So there's all these other things that are going on in the watershed with respect to both conservation and restoration that aren't captured necessarily in the assessment. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know. I'm here to learn about, whether that's true, but I suspect there's an awful lot that's not captured in that regard. And, we want to be able to have a framework, a process that does that as well. So it's both of those components to it, but there's really no other brook trout specific way to capture that information, which is why we proposed getting this project off the ground with a contractor to help lead it. The other outcomes, their metrics or their targets are around number of miles of riparian buffer planted, land stewardship goals. So they're related, but they're not really tied directly to brook trout outcomes. But we want to build on that as well. So if somebody's put, if Fish Passage is saying we've opened up, we've removed barriers and opened up all these stream miles to brook trout, and now we're saying all these stream miles have brook trout in them. Do we really know that or not? How do we, capture that in our efforts to quantify brook trout conservation and restoration?
I'll ask that, I'll pose that question back to you, any of our participants. Does anybody have a way that your state or that your organization is tracking BMPs that are specific to brook trout, or just BMPs in general for stream health that could have co-benefits?
Sounds like not at the state level, but we know that Fish and Wildlife Service and Forest Service track certain programs, on an annual basis, like their fish passage program, and we have our database that shows stream miles, et cetera, habitat work, culverts, that kind of thing. So it's pretty limited, but there are some data there that are not being accounted for.
We have a graduate student at West Virginia University that's working on building a database of stream habitat improvement, restoration projects. And I think that will be somewhat useful, but there is still, it's all dependent on the feedback we get from people doing the work, from operators, giving her the data to put into it. And there are some projects where that have been done on private lands through the certain monies that they're not obligated to release that information to a public entity, mitigation banking and things like that. It's not all available to us to use in that database. So it's going to be somewhat limited, but it'll tell us a little bit of the story. I'll be interested to see when she finishes and what the product looks like.
Yeah, and Steve, remind me again what the time frame is for this contract, and when we can expect to be hearing. Is this 2 years from now? 1 year?
Yeah, it's a 1 year. These are typically 1 year projects. They're funded for 1 year. So we anticipate hopefully end of May, June 1st start date, and they'll be done in the contract part. So this isn't really designed just to be a one-off. This is to jumpstart the effort. So a big part of this person's work and coordinating through the Brook Trout Workgroup will to build better relationships, collaborations, points of contact with all these groups. And Dave, I'll check in with you also with this grad student, because these are the kinds of things we want to develop longer term relationships with, so we can continue to have conversations about who's doing what and figure out a way to collate that going forward. And so we don't anticipate it ending a year from now, and that'll be the end of it. Hopefully we'll have a framework that sets up, and again, whether it's some type of offshoot of what the joint venture has with Jason's system, or some other way we connect their efforts and our efforts. The idea would be then, whatever time frame we think is realistic, 1 year to every 2 years, every 5 years, whatever it is, all those points of contacts and those relationships that we've built through this project will be able to update that information. We've been talking with NIFWIS quite a bit lately with Jake Riley and the Chesapeake Bay program, and with TU as well, as major players in brook trout conservation and restoration. So is there a way we can better coordinate with their efforts on projects and success and things like that? Because there's a huge number of projects over the years that have been implemented through those mechanisms as well.